Hello and welcome to our 2020 MCAP Fall Webinar Series. Today we present the third webinar of a six-part series. Please visit our website at multilingualcalifornia.org for dates of upcoming webinars and additional resources. You may also subscribe on our website for updates. Our next webinar will be on November 4th. My name is Dr. Alma Castro. I'm the director for the Multilingual California Project, a 3-year grant awarded to CABE in March through the CDE Educator Workforce Investment Grant. The goals of MCAP grant are to support professional learning opportunities for teachers, administrators, and paraprofessionals across the state for implementing the English Learner Roadmap policy. The MCAP Alliance includes CABE and 5 strong partners, county offices of education in Butte, Fresno, San Bernardino, Orange, San Diego, and our partner at San Diego State University. The MCAP builds on a robust body of research documenting multilingualism as the most effective option for the academic achievement of English learners across all content areas and for the preparation to participate effectively in the global workforce. As we get ready for today's exciting session, I have a few housekeeping matters to share. As this is a webinar, the speaker's microphone will be active and the participants' microphones will all be on mute. If you would like to pose a question during today's presentation, please feel free to use the chat icon on the Zoom control menu. You may type in your comment or question, and we may have time for some of these questions after today's webinar. After the webinar, we will post the recorded version and resources on the Multilingual California website so that you can access the webinar and resources to share with others. At this time, please sit back, relax, and get ready for 45 minutes of powerful online engagement and learning. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome my colleague, Isela Jacobo from San Diego County Offices of Education, who will be presenting today on how to design engaging ELD resources to maximize English learner student and parent access. Welcome, Isela.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Buenas tardes, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today to share a little bit about what we here at the San Diego County Office of Education have been putting together as we support our LEAs in providing designated ELD instruction for our many English language learners. Again, my name is Isela Jacobo, and I am a former principal. Worked for Cajon Valley School District for 16 years. I've been an educator for the last 23 years. And over time, I've been able to just learn so much about our English language learners and our bilingual learners in general. So it's my pleasure to be here. And as we get started and we move on to the next slide and the next, I would like to take a few minutes, colleagues, to just check in. So we all recognize that we're living in very, very challenging times. We have many pressures at work, we have stress at home, but we must take a minute to stop and breathe and be grateful for the many things that are going well in our lives. So right now I'm gonna ask each and every one of you to take a second and think about what is something that you're most grateful about? What is something that you're very grateful about in your life? Something that you're looking forward, and it doesn't have to be professional if you don't want to. So I'm going to ask you to think about those 2 questions for a little bit. Think about how you'd respond to them. And in the chat box, if you don't mind, please share with us your name, your role, your grade level, and your statement, either the statement of gratitude or optimism that you'd like to share with our group today. And we'll be back in a couple seconds. And Dr. Castro, I'm going to ask you to, if you would please just share a couple statements with us as we get started.
Sure, absolutely. A few statements. Grateful for health. Welcome teachers from all grade levels. I'm looking at K-12. Grateful for our family, again, for our health, for the opportunity to be learning with others, for family, for health, for family. I'm super grateful for family, for friends, for having a job. Thank you for sharing some of these great thoughts. I'm grateful to be in a safe environment, to be learning, to be collaborating. Thank you so much for sharing, participants.
Thank you, Dr. Castro, and definitely thank you to our audience. We are so excited to see that you're finding that moment to stop, breathe, and again, focus on the positive. So as we move on to the next slide, I'd like to share with you very quickly what our learning intentions for today are. So as we engage in this work together, our hope is that we're able to deepen your understanding of essential design considerations to develop more engaging ELD lessons. We also want to work on deepening your understanding of essential design considerations to provide a higher level of access for your English learners and their learning partners. And at this point, I'd like to clarify that when you hear me use the term learning partners, I'm referring to anyone at home who's currently supporting our little ones, our students, and being successful at school. So we know that the reality of our families and our students might be that it's not always mom and dad, a tutor or a guardian. Sometimes it might be abuela, abuelito, it might be tia, tío, it might be the godmother, the oldest sibling. So just recognizing that the learning partners that our students have at home aren't always mom and dad or a legal guardian. Different age groups, different experiences, etc. You'll have the success criteria right next on the other column. So if you don't mind just taking a couple seconds to identify what that is. So given our learning intentions, our goal is for us to engage in how are we going to be designing learning that will increase the engagement of our English language learners and their learning partners, as well as how will we design instructional sequences that will provide higher levels of access. And with that, we move on to the next slide, which is a reminder of our moral imperative when it comes to servicing English language learners. So colleagues, when we signed up to be educators, we signed up to make sure that we would serve every single one of the students who comes through our doors every morning, whether it's the school site or the classroom. We signed up believing that all kids can and should be able to learn. So with that in mind, I want you to just take a few seconds to think about currently in our current context, do we believe that all students can and will learn in our school district, at our school, in our classroom? Reconnecting with that moral imperative is critical now more than ever. So we understand that the challenges that distance and hybrid learning bring to the table are big, but that makes it even more critical that we reconnect with that moral imperative. Alongside with that, we also want to make sure that we all remember that there's a professional obligation that we have to provide every single student with equity and access to the instruction that we're designing, and reminding us that there's also a legal obligation towards the services that need to be provided to our English language learners. And colleagues, we know and we recognize that you all understand this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here in an afternoon at 3:30. So we know and recognize that after a long day of work, you're choosing to come join us and engage with us in learning about, again, how to best engage our English learner families, students, and provide a maximum level of access. So thank you for taking the time to join us. As we move on to the next slide, I want us to just remember the imperatives for educating English learners that the framework sets forth. So there's 8, and as you're looking at them, as you take a few seconds to read through them, I want you to also think about the 4 principles of the English Learner Roadmap and find those overlaps and those strong connections between the two. So we know that Principle 1 of the EL roadmap calls for assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools. And I'm sure that you see that throughout the 8 imperatives that the framework calls for educating our EL. The second principle of the English Learner Roadmap calls for intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. And again, I'm pretty sure that you see that throughout the imperatives that we see listed here. So what I'm going to ask you to do as you continue to read through the 8 imperatives, colleagues, is to please reflect on one imperative that you feel especially proud of as a school site, as a grade level, as an educator, one that you feel that you're doing so well that you'd be willing to share your practice. I also want you to think about one in which you would like to continue to work on and develop skills, develop strengths. As you're reflecting on that, keep your thoughts close. We're not going to be sharing those. Just keep them close to your heart as we engage in our conversation today. As we move on to the next slide, colleagues, I'd like to start by just giving us a quick refresher on integrated and designated ELD. So as we engage in the work that we're going to be doing, it is critical that we recognize that our state provides us with very specific guidance documents that should be, again, guiding the work that we're doing with English language learners. So here on this particular slide, we see reference to the California Common Core Standards. We see the framework for ELA and ELD. We see the ELD standards, and we know and recognize that the work that we're doing with English learners calls for the use of the 3 guidance documents, the frameworks, as well as standards that are specific to the other content areas. So what integrated ELD instruction does for us, as we move on to the next slide, integrated ELD instruction is that ELD that we're providing throughout the day and across all disciplines, across all content areas. We know as proficient educators of English language learners that the work that we're doing during integrated ELD instruction calls for the use of not only the ELD standards, but also the content standards of those other subjects that we're teaching. So in this particular case, I'm making an emphasis on the English language arts standards, and we'd be using, depending on the subject we're teaching, we'd also be using the standards to that subject. So through integrated ELD instruction is that we're providing the support that our English learners need to be able to continue to develop those language skills that are so critical and continue to access the academic standards that we're setting forth for them. The next slide provides us with a quick visual that I really like because it exemplifies vividly how the ELD standards do not work in isolation. They always work in tandem with all other content standards during integrated ELD time. And then we understand that a comprehensive ELD program will also provide opportunities for our students to experience designated ELD instruction, which is the next slide. One before that. And designated ELD instruction is that protected ELD time during the regular school day that provides supports for our English language learners as they're developing the language needed for success in academic tasks. So during this time, colleagues, what's guiding our instruction are the California ELD standards. We're using the standards as the focus for that language development that we're providing to our EL. The next slide shows us how a comprehensive ELD program will have integrated ELD and designated ELD working together. So that into and from that we've heard of that makes language learning and language teaching very explicit and one in support of the other. As we move on to the next slide, we'll recognize that as we're teaching our English language learners, there's 3 essential components that need to happen during that instruction. One of them is that access to the content. We want to ensure that our students are always provided with supports and structures that will give them that access. We want to ensure that they have the language to participate in the lesson that you've designed for them. And we want to ensure that they also have opportunities to learn about how English works. So you'll see, colleagues, that under each one of these buckets, there's very specific strategies and skills that we'd be calling for. And I have a couple of visuals that I like to share with you. Again, as a refresher as to what each one of these buckets means in the classroom. So we had the first one, which was access to the content. And in this particular example, we see that we're using the strategy of labeling to provide additional access to our English learners to this science lesson in which they're learning about the chicken. And you'll see how that additional access is provided through the labels that you see. I'm sorry, and as we move on to the next slide, you'll see that this particular anchor chart is an example of how we're providing our students with the language they'll need to be able to participate and talk about content. So you'll notice some of the same labels, but you'll also recognize specific components of the English language that we're making available for our students to be able to participate in class. As we move on to the next slide, you'll see an example of how students learn about how English works. In this particular example, you'll see it's within the same context of science, within the same theme, the same topic, still learning about chickens, using the content they've learned to also learn about how English works. In this particular instance, learning about singular and plurals. The next thing that we want to highlight as a quick refresher of ELD, it's that part 1 of the ELD standards calls for the 3 modes of communication to be actively interwoven into those lessons that we're designing for our ELs. So we recognize that the 3 modes of communication are interpretive, collaborative, and productive. I want you to pay close attention to how interpretive is listening and reading, collaborative is the listening, speaking, and writing, and productive are those opportunities that we're providing for our students to be able to use the language they've acquired as they continue to evolve it, not only orally, but also in writing. The common denominator, colleagues, between the 3 modes of communication is a heavy emphasis on oral discourse. Oral discourse is a key component of all the frameworks that we're utilizing as we design EL instruction, and it's an essential component that we always need to be attending for. Our students, our English learners, need to have multiple opportunities to use the language that they're learning to engage in that use as they continue to develop it. Moving on to the next slide, as educators, as human beings, we recognize that in today's challenging times, it is critical. It's always been critical, but even more so in these times, to get to know our English language learners. So as we move on to the next slide, I really want to emphasize that the work we're doing today, the work that we did before, and the work that we're gonna do once we're done with this COVID thing, it would always require that we connect to our students, that we build strong connections with them, and that we get to them through their heart to be able to get to their brains. It is critical that we recognize that social emotional needs come first. For our students to be able to learn, they need to feel at peace with them. They need to feel that their needs are being satisfied. They need to know that there's people who care around them. As we move on to the next slide, we know that our English learners are diverse. Our communities are very diverse. They have different challenges, but through surveys that have been conducted through the state in a number of LEAs, we've identified that some of the challenges are the ones that you see listed here. And we know there are many more that didn't even make it to the list. So recognizing all that, it is critical, it's imperative as we move on to the next slide, that we really get to know not only our students, but also their families. On this particular slide, I'm just listing a few ideas for you as to those critical aspects of get to know your students that need to be addressed. So not only knowing their names, and learning about their strengths and their interests, but also asking them about their dreams. And obviously, in order for us to design the best instruction possible, also attending to their academic and language needs. At this point, colleagues, I'd like to ask you, as we move on to the next slide, to please share with us as a group, aside from the items that we see listed on slide 23 as essential components that we need to know, essential information that we need to have on our kids, on our English learner students and their families. What else do you feel is essential that we know as we're designing for the current learning context? We're gonna ask you to add that to the chat box. And we're going to ask Dr. Castro to just share a couple ideas with us. Thank you.
Their fears, technology skills, artistic expression is what's being shared. Let's see, compassion, the need to access technology, languages spoken in the home, education levels, academic levels of parents, culture, language models in the home. How do they differ? Flexibility of instruction and interrupted schooling. Those are a few thoughts, and schedules.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. And those colleagues are essential. That's essential information that we need to have on our kids, again, and their families in order for us to be able to serve them well. So what we're encouraging you to do today is to not only focus on the student, but also their family, those people that surround them and are currently supporting them at home. As we move on to the next slide, we also recognize, and a few of you mentioned this, that it's critical that we understand the English learner typology that we're working with. Are our students refugees? Are they newcomers who are coming with us with interrupted education? Are they coming with us with very formal and solid skills in their primary language that we can use to transfer into the English language? Hopefully maintaining those skills in their primary language as well. Are they students who've been in the system since kinder and have still not been able to reclassify? So why is that? Why have they become a long-term EL? Which are the areas that we need to continue to address to ensure their reclassification? Are they dually identified students, meaning that not only they're English learners, but they're also students who receive special education services? So understanding the typology, the diversity of the English learners we're servicing is essential as well. As we move on to the next slide, I also want to call your attention to the importance of recognizing their proficiency levels. So we know that for many of our English learners, their English learner proficiency assessment, the LPAC, was interrupted. But we still have data that we can utilize to best design academic and language instruction that meets their needs. So as we look at the 3 English language proficiency levels, it is critical, colleagues, that we look at that first square, which is called the native language. And we, again, as a couple of you mentioned, we assess and we determine how can we utilize that native language to as a baseline as we're promoting that development of English in our students. And again, hopefully also maintaining their primary language as we're viewing it as an asset. So the 3 proficiency levels as per the LPAC, and I'm sure you have this info already, are emerging, expanding, and bridging. And we know and recognize that within each one of those levels, there's a continuum of needs that need to be addressed. So the next question that we have for you as we move to the next slide, we're going to ask you to, in the chat box, share with us, aside from the information we've already listed that attends to the social emotional needs, that attends to the academic and the language aspects, what other information do you have currently about your English learners' diversity? What other type of data are you utilizing to best design for your English language learners? If you can please share that in the chat box.
So Isela, I'm seeing some comments about the reading level, their LPAC subtest scores, disabilities, ELD district test. Are the students already multilingual? Students' languages other than their first native, such as Indigenous? Former proficiency levels, very important, right? In both English and in Spanish, whether they are simultaneous or sequential bilinguals. Proficiency levels in native.
Great.
Surveys. There's so much being shared. Motivational levels.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. That's amazing, colleagues. I'm so proud of the work that is being done out there in the fields, and in the fact that you're not settling for an old LPAC score, that you're looking for additional data that best allows you to not only know your students, but meet their needs. So thank you for that. So as we move on to the next slide, just emphasizing that there's this first part of our webinar, what I wanted to do was really highlight the importance of connecting with our students and their families, ensuring that we have multiple ways of communicating not only expectations, but the ways in which our students and families can access support, and the importance for us to collect data that allows for us to best inform the instruction that we're designing for our students. So moving on to the next component of our presentation today, which I know it's what's brought most of you to today's webinar is, so how do we engage and provide a maximum level of access for our English learners via distance and hybrid learning? So there's a couple things that I like to share with you today, colleagues. And the first one is that given all the information that we've gathered on our English learners, everything we've just discussed up to now, it is critical that when we're identifying the supports that we're going to be making available to them and their families, those supports are aligned with their needs. So it's imperative that rather than having a huge menu of tools and resources, we clearly focus on those tools and resources that will allow for them to have the highest level of access, the highest level of production and participation. So what I want to share with you today is the idea of, as you're looking at tools and resources, really putting them in 3 buckets. So when you're looking at your English language learner needs, you'll know, given all the data that you've collected on them, that some of them might need more of that visual and auditory support. Some of them might benefit more from that translation and interpretation support. Some of them will need that collaboration piece. And what I mean by this is not select one over the other, but make sure that the menu of tools and resources we create for them take a little bit of all 3 buckets and put them in a way, present them in a way that makes sense to the students and their families. So finding that tool and that resource that we can heavily bank on to support that visual component. Ensuring that we're definitely bringing in that primary language as support for what needs to happen for our ELs, in making sure that everything we're designing is providing opportunities for our students to collaborate with others, practice and use their language with others, not only us as the facilitator in the classroom, but with their peers and with the people that surround them, the people around them at home. So how do we use these 3 buckets to best create and design instruction for our students? So this particular slide, the title has a hyperlink to a document that allows for us to explore a number of tools. And I'm going to ask our driver to please click on that link. I'm not sure if that was Anya or Dr. Castro. So if possible, if you can click on that link, and if not, colleagues, when you have a minute to spare, just go back to slide 30, click on that link, and what you're gonna find there is a document that attends to the various proficiency levels. It very clearly, explicitly says, okay, this is the level of support, the level of prompting that each one of the proficiency level requires, and here's a few tools that you might wanna consider to support in that area. Now, when you look at that tool, you're gonna find many different tools and resources. And again, what I'm advocating for is that you identify the few that are going to work best for you and your students. And we'll elaborate and share on some of those tools as we move on. So once you've identified the tools, the resources that you're going to utilize to best meet the needs of your students, as we move on to the next slide, it is critical that we ensure that our focus, I'm not sure if I'm frozen or if are we frozen?
No, I think you're good. Are we, I think Anya, can you move on to your next slide, please?
Thank you.
Thank you. And we did drop, I'm so sorry, Isela, we did drop on the chat box the resource link for our participants to be able to access it.
Perfect. And I'm sorry, colleagues, but my internet is sometimes unstable, and I don't know if I'm frozen or not. But as we move on to the next slide, I really want to make an emphasis on, so now that, so as you begin to select tools and resources, it is critical that we highlight the importance of synchronous learning to be utilized for designated ELD instruction that's provided hopefully in small groups by proficiency level. Designated ELD is essential for our English learners, and as essential learning, it needs to happen during synchronous time, in which our students have an opportunity to hear first teaching directly from their teacher, in which we're providing opportunities for students to engage in not only in language learning, but also use. So language use and language practice as we're addressing the 4 language strands: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. On the next slide, I'd like to share with you a couple resources. So colleagues, I know and recognize that by now, most of you have chosen the platform that you're using for student or to share your student facing documents, your student facing materials. So some of you might be using Zoom, others might be using Google Hangouts, some of you might be using Microsoft Teams. Some of you might have found that your students have unstable internet and don't always or aren't always able to use the devices that your district or your school site has provided. So some of you might be finding yourselves using phones. And through phones, we know that there's a number of different apps and tools that we can utilize to have our students access the learning that we're designing for them. And that can be done, we know, through apps like WhatsApp or Google Duo. So what I've done on this particular side of, on the left-hand side of the slide is I've shared with you some of the most common tools that LEAs are using. And I've linked specific documents there as to how to use those platforms. Zoom has been around for a while, at least before COVID started. But we know that as we've been heavily using it, it's developed different features that are wonderful for our English language learners, especially when we're dividing them into small groups. I also want to focus your attention on the strategies that we're sharing for you to consider when you're providing synchronous learning. So just as we would in a brick and mortar setting, in distance and hybrid learning, it is critical that our students are having opportunities to engage in learning with each other. So some of the strategies that you see here on the right-hand side are strategies that I know you've used in brick and mortar. I want to encourage you to also consider the strategies to be utilized in distance and hybrid learning mode. So storytelling as a way to activate students' prior knowledge by having you model sharing a story that's aligned and focused on the content you're going to be teaching, and then encouraging your students to do the same, either in small groups or when you're in whole group as you're having a few of them participate, but definitely giving them the mic and the opportunity to use their voice and use their language. Think, Pair, Share is one that we all know about and that we've all used. There's so many different ways to enact that strategy in distance and hybrid learning, during synchronous learning, as well as asynchronously. But again, giving them the mic, giving them the floor to engage in that. Jigsaws are essential in any type of setting for our language learners, so allowing them to become experts in specific topics or themes as they're working collaboratively with their peers and then coming back to report on their learning. That collaborative work, we know, again, it's conducive to using higher levels of language. It provides our students with role models of other language use as they're engaged in conversation. So each one of those strategies that I've listed there, colleagues, has a hyperlink that I think we're not going to be able to utilize today, but with very specific steps as to how to use that strategy in your learning context, and videos. Now, we all know that the videos are all going to be brick and mortar because there's very few videos that are available for the current learning context. But I would encourage you to, with your grade level, have a conversation as to how can we utilize the strategies in a way that it's effective during synchronous learning. And later on, we'll be talking about asynchronous learning. So asynchronous learning, as we move on to the next slide, also needs to be an opportunity that we provide our students for language practice, review, extension, and enrichment. The asynchronous learning will call for different sets of tools and resources often, but we also want to make an emphasis on providing our students with the opportunity to engage in oracy, in conversation with their peers, in conversation with their groups, with their facilitator or their facilitators if you have more than one adult in the room. For asynchronous learning to work for our English language learners, we need to make sure that we are adapting the content by thinking about not only the platform that you're using and providing access to that via videos and audio clips that very explicitly teach our English learners how to access that platform. We also want to incorporate the same, but for their learning partners. So teaching the parents, the tutors, the guardians, the godmothers, the abuelitas y abuelitos that are helping us at home on how to access those platforms and use those platforms successfully so they can be the best learning partners to our students. We also want to be mindful of the design that we're setting forth as we're planning for instruction and ensuring that that design incorporates features and functions that provide students with greater access. So for example, videos, audio clips, color coding, framing on the actual slides, and I'm going to be showing you a couple examples shortly. But asynchronous learning should definitely be heavily focused when it comes to ELD to provide our students with opportunities to practice and use their language. And I'll give you a few examples. As we move on to the next slide, on this particular slide, I wanted to share with you a few tools that I'm sure you've used a few, and I hope that I'm introducing a couple new ones to you. But there's a couple things that I want to share about the tools for teachers that I have on the left-hand side. And the first thing I like to share with you, colleagues, is that there's two things that have happened during COVID. So number one, a number of these tools and resources have always been free. Others have been made available free and are still free for a period of time. Some of them have evolved and have added additional resources and tools to make them more accessible during distance and hybrid learning. So a couple that are teacher favorites, I get to work with many districts and many schools, and these are some of the ones that always come up. So Nearpod, definitely, to making your slide decks more attractive and engaging, not only visually, but when it comes to the adding of text. Nearpod recently added a feature that allows you to add videos when you can stop and ask questions and engage with kids. What some of our teachers are doing with Nearpod is they're incorporating videos of themselves teaching, stopping their video in critical spots, and adding opportunities to engage with students synchronously. So you can be very creative with the way you're using these resources, but it's critical that you explore them again so we can provide a greater level of access to our students. A favorite of mine and the teachers I work with is definitely Screencastify, not only as a tool for the teacher, but also for the student. Screencast-O-Matic is another one that does the same thing as Screencastify, but you might want to explore, especially what I find is that some teachers like some of the tools and are better for some grade levels than others. But I really wanted to highlight Jamboard. Jamboard was a tool, an app that was designed at the beginning for iPads, and it's not available for products other than Apple and more than iPads. I know that in my interactions with teachers and principals, as we're providing guidance and coaching, many of them are looking for opportunities to utilize a whiteboard like space where students can collaborate and share ideas. Well, that would definitely be one of those tools that you would want to explore if that's what you're looking for. Again, very easy to learn, and not only by our students, but by our parents as well, if we provide the necessary scaffolds for them to be able to access the app and use it successfully. So those are the tools for teachers on the left-hand side, and you'll find hyperlinks to each and every one of them as you go do your own exploration later on. I also want to highlight on the right-hand side tools for students to engage them in meaningful talk. So again, I really want to stress the importance of getting our students to engage in ORC, utilize the language they're learning, practice their language, the language they're learning. And I want to highlight three different apps and tools here. Bookaroo is one that I really like because it allows for students to create audio clips. In the work that we've been doing with students, with our English learners, we know that not all of them feel comfortable opening up their doors to our video cameras. So through Bookaroo, you're able to create audio clips that then you can share, or you can share in turn with peers as well as with your teachers. So you as a teacher can create audio clips, but then your students in turn can also create their own audio clips as they're reflecting on their learning. Flipgrid, and I've added there a link to it in the educator's guide that they make available. It's a fantastic tool for English language learners in so many ways, not only because it allows you to videotape yourself, sharing your learning and sharing your reflections, but what's essential for our language learners is that it allows you to stop the video, restart it as many times as you need. It allows for you to rehearse by creating video after video till you feel comfortable with your product and you're ready to submit it to either your peers or your teachers. So that rehearsal piece of using language over and over, it's essential for our language learners. But as we're looking at building their confidence, building their self-esteem, building more language skills, it is also critical that they have that opportunity to rehearse language. And I'm sorry, because I'm getting a message that I need to wrap it up. So as I do that, Dr. Castro, if you don't mind, if we can just share slides 36 for a second.
Thank you, Isela. Absolutely. And I know that we have some amazing resources. And as we're sharing slide 36, I also want to remind us participants that we will be sharing through our website the slides and the resources. So we'll get you to your slide 36.
So colleagues, and I'm sorry because there's only 4 minutes left and I need to hand over the mic to my colleagues, but I just want to bring your attention to slide 36 and 37 as good examples of incorporating many functionalities to a slide deck, incorporating different features and functions to make a slide deck come alive, not only for your students, but also their families. So on this particular slide, you'll notice the color coding, the framing, the videos from the teacher, the videos with the content, the audio clips, the connections to other platforms for students to be able to show what they're producing. And on slide 37, you'll see the same exact content, but in the primary language, building on what our students bring as assets, tapping on their primary language to give them access to the new English skills that they're acquiring. And with that, I just want to thank you for your time, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Castro.
Isela, thank you so much. This was just a wonderful webinar, and we appreciate you sharing such great strategies, ideas, tools, and supports for our English language learners. Participants, we invite you to share on the chat box other suggestions you may have about professional learning that you would like to see in the future. Also in the chat box, our colleagues are going to indicate today's participant survey. Please be sure to complete your survey, as this is also a requirement for our grant, and it allows us to learn from you and also be able to continue to provide free webinars. We invite you to participate in our next webinar, which will be on Wednesday, November 4th at 3:15. The topic of that webinar will be on supporting English learners in a rural setting. So as I'm concluding today, I will ask my colleagues to please drop on the chat box the participant survey. Please feel free to access the survey right now as we conclude and give us your feedback. That is very important in guiding our work. Also, we invite you to please subscribe to our MCAP website at multilingualcalifornia.org to register for updates of free webinars, professional learning, and resources or events that will be posted. We hope that you and your families continue to stay safe, managing the circumstances due to COVID-19. We are very thankful that you are here with us today and invite you to future webinars presented by Multilingual California Alliance Project. So once again, please be sure to complete your survey. This survey really gives us a guidance on the information that will be helpful in preparing future webinars and is also a requirement for our grant. We hope that you've enjoyed today's webinar, and we say gracias. Thank you for being here with us today, and look forward to our recorded webinar and resources from today's session on multilingualcalifornia.org. Thank you. Gracias. So we'll give a few minutes to ensure that we're able to complete your participant survey. Alexandra, would you kindly drop our participant survey one more time? We are going to stay on the line. We're looking forward to learning more about your interest, and the participant survey is very key as we develop future professional learning, professional webinars for you, so that we can tailor some of the work that is necessary to support you in this amazing work you do as educators. The slide that you are viewing right now also provides the handles for social media, and we encourage you to follow MCAP, Multilingual California Alliance Project, through our social media handles to learn more about webinars, resources, and supports. Thank you for being here with us today. And I know that many of you are still completing your survey, so we're going to stay on for just another moment. Again, your survey, your voice is very important as we tailor supports and services to your needs. Thank you for all you do as educators. And please, as Isela started today's session, reminding us to have an opportunity for self-care and have an opportunity, make an opportunity to be grateful and thankful for those around us and the work that we do. We thank you on behalf of Multilingual California. I do also see in our chat box that we have placed the link for our next webinar, which will be on November 4th. Thank you. I see that some of you are chatting. You're done with your survey. Again, your responses to your survey will help us tailor and guide future professional learning opportunities. Again, on behalf of Multilingual California, we want to thank our colleague Isela Jacobo from San Diego County Offices of Education for such a powerful professional learning opportunity. Thank you, Isela. Thank you, Rita. I see you've completed your survey and now you're following us on social media. And I'm seeing a question about where do we find the presentation. The presentation will be available. We're going to drop the link now on our website on the chat box, but presentation will be available on multilingualcalifornia.org, and that is our website. If you would like to reach our colleague Isela, she's provided her email address there as well. Thank you, Isela, and her Twitter handle as well. We will put the website on the chat in just a moment. Senora Perez will put our website on the chat in just a second. And I know that a few of you are still completing your survey. We appreciate, we want to learn about what are your needs and how we can best support you with those needs. So we'll be providing in the chat box again, the website for Multilingual California. Please visit us and feel free to subscribe for updates of upcoming free webinars, workshops, or materials or resources. We will upload today's recorded webinar and resources on our multilingualcalifornia.org website. Thank you, colleagues. I know we still have over 70 colleagues here with us today completing your survey. Again, we appreciate your input and your voice through your survey to continue to provide amazing webinars that address the needs that you have in your local counties and areas. And I'll ask my colleague, Alexandra, can you please post the survey again? I do see folks on the chat box asking for the link to the survey. And yes, absolutely. On our website, there is a link. There is a title that is that says Fall Webinar Series. Under that title, you will see the previous webinars that have been presented. It's called Past Webinar Recordings, and you'll be able to access today's recording under that subtitle that is titled Past Webinar Recordings. So thank you. I know that Alexandria has dropped the link for today's survey. Again, thank you participants for being a part of today's webinar. And again, thank you Isela Jacobo from San Diego County Offices of Education for an amazing presentation. We look forward to more webinars that will be presented to you. The next one will be on November 4th. And at this time, we want to wish you buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Alma Castro, Director of MCAP. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy. Thank you for being here with us today.